All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in the building. Newest episode. Welcome back to the JWJ podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, James Washington, and I'm going to do something a little bit different today. Before I introduce our other co-host, I have a very special introduction that I want to make. And yes, I'm going to do it because I'm the type of buddy that likes to brag. So what I'm going to do is I'm about to introduce the 2022 Georgia Press Association award-winning, I'm talking third place sports feature, third place sports column, first place sports photo, first place sports section, first place sports coverage. Guys, let me tell you something. Latest award ceremony, and I quote, the judge for the sports section said in their own words, "This is a super sports section in every respect. It's insightful, interesting writing, and awesome photos. Readers must be glad to have you as their hometown newspaper." And guys, you know who runs that section? That's my boy coming on the mic right now. That's Mr. Shane Thomas. I wish I had some Ric Flair music right now. What's going on, big dog?
I get your money. Thank you so much, man, for that introduction, man. You trying to make tears come out my face.
Oh, I'm gonna do it even more because, guys, when y'all hear this, I need y'all to send us audio clips of y'all singing happy birthday to the boy, because my dude is a year older right now since it's after midnight on the East Coast. Happy birthday, bro.
Man, appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. Another year around the sun, right? So
yes,
34th birthday. And we already had our celebration last week, and it continues for the next 4 days. So yeah, 34 years old. James, thank you for the awesome introduction, man. Like, I don't think people realize, we'll probably touch on this on a later episode, but I don't think people understand, like, you know, I've been a professional journalist for 6 years. I've been doing this since college. Like, I won things in college and didn't think that, you know, it would be that hard. And I get to the pro level, and I mean, shoot, I went my first 3 years and I didn't win anything. And it was a lot of self-doubt. So like these last 3 years, man, we've really stepped our game up, and, you know, it's a section I can take ownership of. And, you know, these last 3 years, we've been an award-winning paper, and we've increased our first places every year. I think in our editorial section, we had 5 first places, and I got 3 of them. So, you know, yeah. So we're doing good things down at the Valdosta Daily Times. And it's an honor to be, you know, representing Georgia Press like that. So
hashtag general excellence.
Yeah, which sounds weird, but a general excellence 5 years in a row.
There you go.
I said it a few minutes ago. I'm gonna say it again. Holla at your boy, I get some money.
Yeah, man. But look, that can actually lead us right in. I'm gonna let you get to the recap. But look, you were talking about how, you know, you've been doing it for a minute, and you were getting discouraged and this and that. And you know what, that actually sounds like a certain individual who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little bit, because after quite the road to get to the mountaintop, Mr. Gary Payton II is finally a champion now. And I'm sure he had some of those moments where he wasn't sure where his path was going to take him, but he knows where it's taking him now, because he is there,
man. And you know, that's got to be sweet for his dad. I mean, growing up in that area and seeing what his son has gone through. I mean, this was a guy that was he was trying to lobby for a job as a video coordinator for Golden State after they cut him like 2 or 3 times. So I mean, that's an inspiring story for sure. And
trying to get his Eric Spoelstra on it.
Absolutely. and that just goes to show, don't quit. You just put your head down and keep working, and good things will happen.
Absolutely. No, it's just awesome to see, just like you said. And I mean, I feel like I'm gonna have to go and Google this at some point, because I'm super curious now. But they said that Now Gary and his father, who of course we all know, the Hall of Famer, the glove, one of the only guards to win Defensive Player of the Year in NBA history. We're going to get on that a little bit later as well. But now Gary Payton II and his father are one of, I think, said only 5 or 6 father-son duos to both have rings in the NBA now.
Yeah, and without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it. Everybody's watched the game by now. I will give James his props. He predicted Warriors in 6, and yes, here we are.
Yes, I've been telling everybody. I didn't have one. I just had it sitting on the shelf. If y'all could look on Amazon and find a nice mahogany base for a crystal ball, I could use one. I mean, because it kind of rolls all over the place. It's kind of annoying. But yeah, Psychic Life. I tried to tell you guys, look, I will say it over and over again. My opinion on this series, of course, if you know me, you know how hardcore of a Laker fan I am, have been for, like I said, about 25 years at this point. But that in no way had anything to do with my opinion on this series. I need to make sure I throw that out there. What this came down to was simply inexperience. It's just inexperience. The moment got big, people shied away, and that was that. But that's what I figured was going to happen going in. It's not that Boston doesn't have the talent. I just still felt like the talent wasn't ready. And they'll be back, but we'll touch on that as well. But I mean, kudos to Boston for putting up the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Golden State comes out tonight. They win the game 103-90. Steph Curry with 34 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists. Shot 12 of 21 from the floor, 6 of 11 from 3. And he is named the Bill Russell NBA Finals MVP for the first time in his career, leading Golden State to victory tonight. Other guys stepped up big in this game. Andrew Wiggins had 18 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 steals, and 3 blocks. Maple Jordan doing his thing. And Jordan Poole came out in the first half. It was the pool party. 11 points in 9.5 minutes, ends up with 15 points in 18 minutes. And Draymond Green stepped up. Best game of the series. They don't win tonight without him. He played extremely well. 12 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 blocks, and he was plus 16 in his minutes on the court, man. Draymond really stepped up, hit some threes, flexed to the crowd a few times. It was awesome to see him affect the game offensively. Defensively, he had complete control over everything. And Golden State approached this game like a championship team. Everybody knew, everybody thought, okay, well, Boston's going to hit them first. They're at home. They're going to come out juiced. And they did. I mean, it was 14-2 early. And, it looked like Golden State was kind of on their heels, but they stayed with it. It's a game of runs. And boy, did they come with one. 21-0 run in the first half, closed the first half on a 52-25 run to take a 15-point lead by halftime.
And when I say experience and depth will work wonders, the scariest thing to think about was a good portion of that 21-0 run for Golden State. Steph was on the bench. Steph wasn't even playing. So that goes right back to what we've been talking about all along. Our biggest issue with Boston's rotation was that there really wasn't one. And tonight, you saw that Udoka, for other reasons, he did start to switch things up a little bit. We saw Derek White, we saw Peyton Pritchard towards the end of the first quarter, which I feel not necessarily for Derek White, but that is the earliest that we've seen of Peyton Pritchard in this round, at least. So little things were changed around, but unfortunately just too little too late. And like I said, it just felt like once the wind was taken out of Boston's sails, and when the wind was taken out was obviously with that 21-0 run. Even before then, I mean, it was 11-0 at the end of the first quarter. They closed. Golden State closed out the first quarter on an 11-0 run. I think that the moment, the exhaustion, you could already see that it was starting to catch up. And even though Boston did come with a solid run to bring that back, I mean, they got the game back to single digits. So again, kudos. But I think that the moment itself, combined with everything that Boston had to do to get back into the game, it just took them out, and it was just too much for them.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, they just shot themselves in the foot constantly. I mean, it didn't even matter. I mean, they shot the ball better than they did maybe last game. They had 27 assists tonight, but they had 22 turnovers. And I mean, we talked about it last game. You know, they had 18 turnovers. So you're talking 40 turnovers in the last two games by a team that's in the NBA finals. Like, that just goes to show, like, guys got tight. A lot of guys that haven't been in that moment, even their most experienced players. Al Horford, most experienced guy on their team. It's his first NBA finals. Kudos to him, by the way. He had a double-double tonight and really helped keep Boston in that game for long stretches in the second half. Him and Jaylen Brown really stepped up and kind of were the lifeblood for the Celtics in this game. But 22 turnovers, on your home floor, it's just not a recipe for success, man. And they just had so many turnovers that were live ball deals where there were steals and that led straight to layups. I think Boston ended up giving up, I think, 27 points off those 22 turnovers. And, that is going to be the kiss of death most nights when you're talking NBA basketball, any level, really. I mean, they got beat on the bench as well. I know you talked about Boston's rotation or lack thereof, 21-5, off the bench. I mean, look at Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole had 15 points.
Yeah, no
he tripled Boston's output.
Yeah, no surprise at all. And another thing that played a big role early on, which actually had me thinking that Boston might have had some staying power, was it seemed like the referees were falling for quite a bit of theatrics in this game. In the first quarter specifically, Marcus Smart drew two fouls, one on Steph, one on Clay. And it's funny, you go back, and of course, we have the privilege of seeing replays, but the cell was everything. And I think it was I can't remember if it was Mark Jackson or if it was Van Gundy, but one of them made the remark, there's definitely contact on these plays, but that contact gets ignored if Marcus Smart doesn't hit the floor. So it's, of course, basketball is so funny that basketball tends to get looked at, or, someone that doesn't play it will try to categorize it as a non-contact sport. Get on the court and then say that at the end of a game. These guys are getting hit. It's a natural thing. But like I said, one thing that was big early on was that Marcus Smart was selling Boston into picking up some very, very, for lack of a better, smart fouls early on. Clay picked up his first two fouls in under 3 minutes. So that's what had me thinking that Boston might have something going. If you can get Golden State in foul trouble, of course, naturally, that's going to change how a team is going to play you defensively. You're going to be able to open up certain looks. You might be able to run certain things certain ways. So I thought initially that was going to be Boston's saving grace, was that they were being very smart about drawing people into fouls.
Yeah, and I mean, that definitely plays into their hands. I mean, as a superior defensive team in the league. I mean, they play physical, but they're very smart as far as if you try to respond to their physicality with physicality of your own, you're going to kind of get baited into playing their game. And I thought, they, like you said, they kind of got that advantage early, but I feel like Golden State did a good job of adjusting. I feel like they just kind of settled in and understood that, it's going to be a physical game. They may not get the benefit of some of those whistles. And I thought they weathered that storm pretty well. I thought, especially as the game went on, it felt like Golden State definitely imposed themselves more. And it felt like the Celtics, in a way, even though they kept coming, I feel like they didn't have the same level of intensity once Golden State kind of settled in with their own physicality. They got to more loose balls. They just ripped the ball away from them a few times and turned it into points. So it was key that Golden State not only responded from an offensive standpoint, but from a defense and physicality disposition standpoint as well. Like, their ability to respond at different moments in this game was very key for them to be able to put the finishing touches on this championship tonight.
With the way that this league is going, the way that it's been for quite some time, and even if you just look at this series as a microcosm, something that has to be pointed out is naturally, with things being, driven by analytics and the change with the shot clock a few years ago, resetting to 14 instead of 24, increased possessions in games and all of that. We knew that we were going to be in for something a little more high scoring. It's no surprise to see that there was not a single game in this series that was decided by the winner scoring fewer than 100. But what I feel needs to be pointed out, and I feel like this is where this got me to the point where I truly believed that Boston was out of the water. This was the second game in this series that they were held to fewer than 40 and a half. What was that? I think game 4 when they only had 39. Was that game 3 or 4 that we were watching? I can't remember for sure.
That was game 4.
Game 4. Okay. So yeah, game 4 they're held. It was 51-49 at the half. I mean, you look at this one, it was 54-39 at the half. So the fact that Boston was held to only 39 in the first half for the second time in this series, combined with the first, / second quarter run, and the fact that Steph was starting to show us that you better go ahead and forget what happened to me because I'm back and I'm going to remind you who I am. That to me was the writing on the wall for Boston. And I know Jeff Van Gundy said I think it was either during the second quarter or right before the third, he made a really good point. And again, it goes back to the way that this league is going right now, the way that players and teams run their offense. He said, in a league where so many teams pride themselves on their offense, as soon as you come out here and you miss a few shots, as soon as you come out here and, the backdoor screens and that aren't working, as soon as your shots stop falling, if a team is not ready for the moment, that is the kiss of death. He's like, even if a team is strong defensively, if the ball's not dropping, a lot of teams fold in that moment. And I think that was a big part of what sealed it for Boston tonight.
Absolutely. And a big reason, that's a brilliant point that Jeff made. I mean, when you look at most young teams and you look at, like you said, this moment, just look at the two rosters. I mean, Golden State has a team, even though they have a lot of guys whose calling card is offense, there was a lot of guys on that team that also played, excellent defense. Draymond Green played excellent defense. Andrew Wiggins was phenomenal defensively. Steph Curry, even though people try to bag on him and say he doesn't play defense, that dude was guarding Al Horford. That dude was all over the court. He was getting his hands in there. He was getting strips. At one point, he got the stop on Horford because Horford we're talking 6'10" against 6'2", and he made Horford pass out that could have been like a jump hook or maybe even a dunk, and got him to give the ball up. Like, Golden State's known for offense, but their defense, let's not kid ourselves, their defense is elite, and it has been throughout this whole run.
It's and this is just a quick point. It's very much worth mentioning, specifically in this game tonight. If you were an outsider that didn't follow basketball to the extent that we do, you could watch this 48 minutes tonight. We could tell you that the defensive player of the year was in this game tonight, and I could pay you money, and you probably wouldn't have been able to tell me who it was.
And that's what elite level offense can do to elite level defense at this level, especially in this era, because the offense in this era is it's allowed to kind of dictate the game. I think back then, when it was more physical, you could hand check, it allowed the defense to be able to dictate what the offense can do a little bit easier. Eventually, good offensive is going to win out most of the time. It's just,
Right.
when the defense can dictate what the offense is able to do, that's when you get the lower scoring games. And the reason that they, went with the rule changes to begin with. So elite offense is still going to beat elite level defense most times, especially when the game is kind of catered more to the offense. But I mean, this was just guys putting their head down, going by people. I mean, Steph Curry was getting past whoever, he was getting separation, he was getting downhill and making plays. And I mean, that was everybody. That was Wiggins, that was Jordan Poole. I mean, that was pretty much everybody on their team that was able to get dribble drive penetration and get by guys in green.
Bro, and another one, while we're talking about getting by, my goodness, I wish there was a way that we could send all of y'all some video footage. Did you catch that second quarter pass from just inside the logo, top of the key, from Draymond to Clay, when when he caught Clay on the cut, man? Yo, as soon look, I'm sitting there watching the game. And like I turned to my wife and she was watching the game with me, and as soon as Draymond connected on that pass, as soon as it landed in Clay's hands, I got up and went and grabbed some water. I was like, this is a wrap. I was like, as soon as you're breaking down Boston's defense on that level, there's only so much more you can do. I mean, Draymond just has an eye for this game that is unreal. Like, I don't know how many other guys in this league outside of, maybe like a Jokic, a Luka, like there, I don't know how many other guys can make that pass on the fly. Like the defense had started to set up. It's not like it was a fast break. The defense was set. Clay's man is here, split second, he blinks, and that's all it takes, because just like you said earlier, Draymond played such a Draymond game tonight. He was only 2 assists shy of a triple-double. And that just goes to show you his value to this team. Like, so many viewers, so many people may think that if you're not averaging 20 a night, or if you're not putting people on posters, or you're not doing all of those things, that your value is somehow diminished. But because of what Draymond does for this team, I'm going to argue the complete opposite. The things that Draymond does for this team, it exponentially increases his value. This team does not win this ring. Did he have a stellar series? Maybe not. But when it mattered, Draymond came in and did Draymond things. And that was tremendous going towards the win for Golden State tonight.
Absolutely, man. His fingerprints were all over this game on both ends. And if you notice, I mean, the dude was locked in. There was some talking to the refs, but not like there wasn't a whole lot of complaining. It was him. They were in championship mode. And I mean, the team goes as he goes. He makes all those guys better. Like, he allows Steph to be Steph. He allows Clay to be Clay. Like, his ability to be a point forward and a facilitator from the power forward position allows that team the ability to go off the way they do. I mean, that play, that play is a pet play that they've ran for years. I mean, that high post split, and then just a gorgeous back cut by Clay. I mean, you're thinking the ball's going to the top, and then Clay just rolls to the rim. And I mean, it was, oh man, like, I'm with you on that one, man. I had to actually like pause it and rewind it a few times. Like, I was like, yo, what a pass, man. What a pass. And man, when Golden State's rolling the way they're rolling, man, it's a beautiful thing to watch, because it's not just Steph. Like, Steph, he had his moment in the second half where he really put the game to bed. But I mean, it was Jordan Poole. It was Draymond. It was those guys just playing really well together. And Andrew Wiggins is kind of, he takes that team, that particular group of players, to another level, just because he buys in on everything that they do. I mean, he did everything. He rebounded, he passed, he got his hands on loose ball, he blocked a lot of shots, he got out in transition. Like, his ability to just fly around and do everything, combined with Draymond's ability to control the action, Like those are two players that made this run particularly special for that group.
Couldn't agree more. It's so beautiful to see the team come together the way that they did. I mean, everybody throughout this series has had that moment where they kind of left us with question marks. I mean, we saw the underwhelming game from Steph. I mean, Clay is still working his way back from, we talked about it before, two devastating injuries. You're dealing with an ACL tear, an Achilles tear. Like I said before, a lot of guys, you catch injuries like that, two guys, your career is over. And now after being out for 2 years, dude's a champion again. It just speaks to the pedigree of the organization. It speaks to the camaraderie that these guys share. I mean, if you listen to post-game speeches, one of the main things that Clay wanted to keep driving home is that I would not have made it back if it wasn't for my brothers and it wasn't for guys like Steph and Dre. Like it's the relationship that these guys share is so much deeper than the game. And that translates to what happens on the court. Like I mentioned it to you earlier. We were talking about, those guys getting up in age and everything and what that's going to mean for them. Of course, we'll get into more of that later, but it's the big thing that we took from that conversation is chemistry can trump a lot of things. We even saw it back in San Antonio. I mean, chemistry can trump a lot of shortcomings. And in this case, like I said, poor shooting nights, poor defensive nights, the ball's not moving like it should. We're dealing with a lot of turnovers, this, that, whatever. In the end, chemistry played a huge part. And if you look at those two benches, it's obvious where the majority of that was.
Yeah. And chemistry makes up for a lot of other deficiencies. Chemistry can make up for being an older team. Look at prime example. You said San Antonio. Like look at the team in 2011 with Dallas. They beat Miami because not only were they an older group, but all those dudes bought in and they believed. There was a lot of people that were hungry, that wanted to win, that had been on teams that were good enough to get there maybe or get close, but never won. And all those dudes bought in to the philosophy that, hey, like we're all in together. Like we win together. Golden State has been that way for a long time. And all those dudes came in together. You don't win. You don't make the finals 6 times in 8 years by accident. You don't do that if you're not a team that plays with unbelievable chemistry and togetherness. Like you don't win 4 titles in 6 appearances if you don't have good chemistry, especially with a team that still has its core intact. Like you look at Boston. I mean, Boston had really good chemistry, but at the end of the day, there was a talent gap between the two teams. Like top to bottom, I mean, you could make the argument that this year's Golden State team might be like the least talented of their 4 title teams in a way, but you also have guys that, even though it's been a different team each time, you still had the same core, but you've also had different guys step up. Like the first title was what? Harrison Barnes and Andrew Bogut and David Lee and like all those guys, right? And then you get to this team.
And then of course we got to mention the GOAT Iguodala,
and Andre Iguodala, exactly. Like you look at this year's team. I mean, Iggy was still there, but you got like a new wave of guys. You get guys like Gary Payton. You get guys like Jordan Poole.
Yeah, man.
Like those dudes, like their ability to get on this stage and not even be phased. I mean, Jordan Poole had his moments just in this game where his shot making for stretches really kind of turned it, Golden State's way in this game. But you also saw some of his shortcomings come out kind of in the second half when Boston started making that run. They were literally targeting Jordan Poole every time down. And he couldn't guard a bank with a machine gun. He was struggling. Everybody knows Jordan Poole ain't out there to play defense. Like he's out there to get buckets. And when he's going well, that's good. But sometimes like him kind of leaning on his shot making kind of turns him into a target because they know he can't really guard guys for extended periods, and they were going right at him. And so I think he'll probably take this as a challenge to improve defensively as well. Because I mean, everybody thought, oh, you can go at Steph. Steph put on like what 15 pounds of muscle, and you could tell the difference in his game.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to one of our conversations again earlier. I mean, it's the adversity is going to come, setbacks are going to come. Are you going to shy away, or are you going to step up? Is that going to bring out the dog in you? And I mean, you said it perfectly. You know, Steph put on the muscle. I mean, Clay had to fight back from, you know, devastating injuries. We had, you know, like you said, Jordan Poole is probably going to take this as a challenge moving forward, because he's already shown us he's that kind of guy. I mean, even just in this postseason alone, I mean, you go back to the second round, game 2 against Memphis, when the team lost Gary Payton, you know, with the elbow injury, the Dylan Brooks foul. Steve Kerr even said himself, he was like, I didn't think he was coming back. And next thing you know, you get stories out of their camp that this dude is at practice with his arm in a sling running sprints just so that he could stay ready. That is where the winners are made. That the problems are going to come. There has not been a single championship team in the history of this league that has not had to deal with some sort of setback at some point. It's all about how you bounce back. And Golden State showed us plain and clear that they were ready for the moment. And it all goes back to that experience. But it also, like you said, goes to buying in. I mean, you have your vets in, you know, Steph, Dre, Clay, you got Iggy and all those guys. And shout out to Iggy, because I mean, you know, I'll say shout out to Iggy. First off, shout out to Steve Kerr for actually making sure that he got a little bit of time, you know, during the garbage minutes. I thought that was cool. Just in case he does decide to hang it up. I thought it was cool to make sure that he saw the floor at least for a minute. But with Iguodala, that goes right to the point. Iguodala didn't see a lot of time on the floor. I mean, he was coming back from injury, and also, just like you said, those younger guys are taking up a lot of those minutes and putting in a lot of that work. But if you paid close attention, we've said it a million times, the winners aren't always on the court. The winning starts in the locker room. The winning starts behind the scenes. And if you notice, you probably, if you look at the sideline at the right time, you would assume that Iguodala was on the coaching staff. I mean, he's over there every single time a player slips up. You can see the emotion in his face. You can see the irritation in his face. And as soon as they come to the bench, the first thing he does, it's not chastising, it's not yelling. He pulls them aside and starts coaching. He pulls them aside and starts letting them know, hey, next time do this. You let your man shy off this way. Next time, step over here a little bit, cut him off early. He's over here helping guys out. And like I said, that is such a huge part of a winning organization, is having guys like an Andre Iguodala that are willing to buy in, even if your biggest impact doesn't come on the floor.
And you see that all the time, man. It San Antonio, it was a commonplace thing to see Timmy or Manu or Tony there with Pop. They got the clipboard. They're running things in the huddle. Like, those are the best teams, guys that are plugged in, man. Like, having a high IQ guy like Andre Iguodala, a guy who came into this league as kind of like an athletic freak, and a guy that his versatility was his calling card coming into the league. It's the reason that he's hung around so long. But you don't hang around as long as Andre Iguodala has if you're not showing what he's shown in this series from the bench, pulling guys aside like an Andrew Wiggins, that a guy who, you know, may have been looked at unfairly as a guy that may have felt like he was too cool for school and things like that, coming from a team that hadn't won anything, you know, and he's pulling guys aside, putting them in the right spot. Like, guys like Iguodala are coaches' dreams, man. I've talked to tons of coaches in my career, and having guys that play for one another, not just with each other, for one another. Like that's when you see guys like Iguodala show their genius. Guys that have put their own personal desires, to the side in favor of doing whatever it takes to win. And his ability to impact the game that way is crucial. Like his leadership on that team. We talk about Dre, we talk about Steph. Iggy coming back to that team was key because it stabilizes that second unit and it keeps some of the younger guys plugged in that are just getting a taste of this. Like Andrew Wiggins hadn't played on teams like this before. So Iggy's impact on guys like that, like on Jordan Poole, on Gary Payton, like he was one of the main guys. Like when Gary Payton was having those weird defensive lapses in this game, boneheaded fouls, things like that, when Boston was starting to make a run, first guy you see is Iguodala. Like, hey man, like be solid. Like he was making a lot of plays that young dudes, a lot of mistakes that young dudes make, and Iguodala was right there to correct him and put him in the right direction. You need guys like that if you're going to win a championship, and it's no surprise that he's been a part of all four of those championship teams.
Definitely, man, definitely. So I I feel like I need to point out before I move on. This is something that totally threw me, and I might be late to the party, but yeah, every now and then, it's Boston, and I don't care. So we're sitting there watching the game. I think it was during the second quarter. Maybe I think Boston had just called a timeout, but everybody's over to the sideline. I look over, and I'm sure you probably knew this, Shane. I mean, you do tend to be up a little better on, on what, bench moves and front office and this and that. It totally blew my mind when I looked over at the Boston bench and saw Damon Stoudemire. I had no idea. I had no idea that this man was on their coaching staff. So I'm looking and I'm like, wait, dude looks crazy familiar. I'm like, I know that's not Damon Stoudemire. So I immediately had to go and Google it. And sure enough, he's been there since July of last year. I was blown. I was just, I didn't know what was happening. Another thing I wanted to point out is not even so much related to strategy or anything in the game, but we talk about this all the time. Just another little funny moment that I noticed tonight. I want to go back. There was a play in the second quarter. Kevon Looney, he comes up I believe it was out of a set, but at one point Kevon Looney comes up, grabs a board, and he pretty much tried to tear the rim off the backboard. Like he goes up and he was out for blood. But the funniest thing I noticed, and I've mentioned this to you before, I think this might have been the first time that I've seen someone go up for a putback or a dunk or anything like that with so much aggression, miss it, and the ref doesn't blow the whistle. I feel like that's one of the plays in a basketball game that gets bailed out so often, is the assumption that a missed dunk is always because of defensive contact. And that was mind-blowing to me that happened. And because I think at the time there were at least 3 or 4 Celtics around him and no whistle. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that play, I thought he was about to catch a couple bodies on that play. Like I thought Looney was about to fly in and destroy people's world on that one. But like, like you said, man, like him that showed what kind of time that Golden State was on. Like him, Wiggins, like those dudes were going to the rim. And like, and another thing, we talked about like injuries, right? Like we talked about Steph with his hand and then his ankles, and we talked about Clay with his career threatening injuries. One guy that has been kind of forgotten in that shuffle is Kevon Looney. I mean, this is a guy, I think he had surgery on both hips. And I mean, that dude, they don't make it to the finals without Kevon Looney. And it felt like, it's weird when it felt like Kevon Looney wasn't even on the roster. Like, it was like they won the first title, Looney's there, and then it's like he kind of disappears for a while. It's like he was on the team, but he wasn't like a high minute guy or whatever. But like this year, he kind of reemerged as a difference maker on that team, and you see what he can do when he's healthy. And to this series, Dallas, like that dude was awesome. Like Kevon Looney, his impact can't be overstated. I mean, he was a difference maker. It wasn't in statistical exploits. It was his effort and his energy and him throwing his weight around and being like that high energy guy that was also like a defensive anchor, even though he was, coming in off the bench. Like his impact was great. And it just goes to show like the difference between the two teams. Like they had multiple guys on Golden State that could come in off the bench and be difference makers in some way. Boston didn't really have anybody outside of Derek White in one of the games that really came in the game and changed it for the better. And a lot of times they didn't even get the amount of time. I mean, Grant Williams was out there, Derek White was out there, but then Peyton Pritchard doesn't play. I mean, we talked about him after last game. Like their lack of bench really hurt them in this series. And not only that, it was their lack of experience. It was their lack of killer instinct at times. Like everything that you would pin on a young team in a big spot, Boston was guilty of. And it's a shame that it had to happen that way for them. But at the same time, like these are the growing pains you get when, say, you kind of overachieve and get to the finals. Like everybody's been there. LeBron's first team in Cleveland was swept. Like you get embarrassed, but it's important that guys accept the challenge. Look at certain people that go through their playoff origin story. Like, Magic Johnson was terrible in the finals. They called him Tragic Magic, and now he's the greatest point guard of all time. Like you talk about guys that have had their teeth kicked in and they've had to come back. Like all the playoff failures that guys like Dirk had to deal with. Like by the time you get to 2011, like, yeah, he had first round exits. He won MVP and was a first round exit. Like all those things made him come back with something new. And that leads me to the next thing I want to talk about. And that's number 0 in Boston. Like Jason Tatum, he wore the Kobe armband for game 7 against Miami. But, and the whole text message deal and all that. And
Kobe done blocked that number.
Yeah, I think Kobe done, went ahead and put him on D&D. Like I don't think Kobe's trying to hear that right now. Like he's probably giving him that death stare from the side right now.
Kobe said, new phone, who this?
Exactly, new phone, who this? And Jason Tatum comes out. I mean, he scored what, 7 points in the first quarter, but he ends with 13 on the night. I think he had 11 of those 13 in the first half. He shot 6 of 18 from the floor. 7 assists, but he had 5 turnovers, 3 steals. Like Jason Tatum had multiple opportunities in this series to put his stamp on it and show why he was first team All NBA. He only had one game really where, he had a good game. I mean, it was game 5. I mean, he came out, I think he had 27 in that game, but he didn't put his stamp on it in the fourth. He didn't impose his will on the game. And, he comes out tonight. I mean, he wasn't efficient, shot 33% from the floor. Like those performances like tonight, you got to use that as motivation. Like you can't, if you want to be known as that killer and that elite guy, like he's got to come back with like some like noticeable improvement, because before this season, everybody said like, who's their guy? Is it Tatum or is it Jaylen Brown? And we were talking about this before we came on the pod. Like, Jaylen Brown had 34.7 rebounds. Like, for what Jason Tatum is the more talented of the two guys, but I think the difference between them is Jaylen Brown has more of a killer instinct and mentality, whereas Tatum is more well-rounded, but doesn't have the same like dog mentality. I think if you could combine the two players, like you have like a max guy and an impact guy.
Now we were told from the first time that we played on any sort of organized team, one of the cliche phrases that you later find out is, I mean, it holds so much truth. There are certain things that you can't coach on a basketball court. You can't coach size. You can't coach heart. You can't make a player want it. I can give you all the reasons in the world why you should, but I can't make you want it. And that, to me, like that even goes back to the conversation on our last episode where we talked about, the hypothetical finals MVP going the other way. And we were talking about who would take it. Tatum, to me, was never in that conversation. And a big reason for that. Right. And a big reason for that is because of what you just said. To me, when you stack them side by side, talent alone, I'm taking Jason Tatum all day. However, it's a matter of when do you want to bring out that dog. And I mean, the reason that we saw the consistency that we saw from Jaylen Brown is simply because Jaylen, in my opinion, wanted it more. He was there for the series. I mean, Jaylen was there for the fight, and I feel like Jason was there for the moment. And I think there's a very big difference between the two.
Yeah, and Tatum had games in the series where he comes out and plays well, or he comes out and doesn't. It's a slow start and then he gets warm. Like, I think, was it last game where he played a 7-minute spurt in the first quarter and didn't take a shot?
Yeah,
I think it was last game.
I believe so. Oh, and I want to throw this in there too. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it by now. Fans, if you're listening, I'm sure you've probably seen it by now as well. First player in NBA history with over 100 turnovers in a playoff. I mean, it, to me, that again goes so much deeper than simple talent. Talent does not prepare you to hold on to the ball. That's mindset. That's mentality. That is being mentally prepared for the game and for the moment. And that right there is a prime example of showing us that one of them was more prepared than the other.
Yep. And that's the difference between a guy like Kobe and then, like, a Jason Tatum. Like, when you look at guys, like, look at Karl Anthony Towns, right? Super talented player. But then you look at Joel Embiid. Like, right. Joel Embiid is a man. Like, Karl Anthony Towns likes to bark a little bit, but everybody like agrees. Like, they're just looking at him like, nah, you ain't like that, right?
Biggest chihuahua I've ever seen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like with Tatum, like, you could tell he was thinking and that he was tight. And if you're thinking, you're not playing. It's like, like, I can speak to it in my own playing experience. Like, when you're thinking, you're not going to play well ever. Like, I can mention a bunch of times where I'm like, man, I'm thinking about everything. And it probably was like some of the worst basketball I've ever played in my life. Like, he was tight and he was thinking. There were plenty of times where he could have taken the shot and then he hesitates and then he gives the ball up. It's like,
yeah.
When you, like, how many times you see Kobe pass up a shot? How many times you see him like second guess himself on the court? There's a certain confidence in knowing like, hey, I'm that guy and I'm willing to live with the result. Like people, oh, Kobe didn't pass. It's like, well, Kobe was also like knowing he was about to shoot it too. There's not too many games where you can say Kobe had the game-winning shot and he passed it up. You know, like there's not too many Kobe Bryant game-winning assists. I'm gonna just put it that way. Like Jason Tatum.
Shout out to Ron Artest, by the way.
Kobe passed me the ball. like with Jason Tatum, he can't play in his head. He's got to play free and he's got to be willing to live with the result. That's what separates the good players from the great ones. That's what separates just an okay player from somebody that's willing to take that next step. Like you have to be willing to go for it and be able to live with the result. And there were so many times where he was passing up things, he wasn't being aggressive, or maybe he just didn't maybe take shots that he can make. Like he's got to basically overall just add to the mindset and understand, like, look, I'm here for a reason. I'm a first team all NBA performer and I need to play like it. Like, because the team's gonna follow your lead. And I mean, think about it. He's their first team all NBA, right? Like they're gonna follow his lead. Like they're gonna follow guys like Marcus Smart. But both of those dudes were having their moments where they were tight and they were second guessing. And the whole team played tight. You don't turn the ball over 40 times over a 2-game stretch if you're not tight and you're not thinking and you're not confident. And Jason Tatum has defined that within himself. Because I mean, look at other guys that have been there before. Like look at Al Horford. Like he hadn't played well in the series since game 1. He had one game where he had like 9 and 9. It was his most complete game, as James pointed out last pod. But Horford came out and he laid it on the line. Like he had 19 and 14. Like he had plenty of plays later in this game that
played
Boston in it.
Yeah, played a terrific game tonight.
And that confidence is key. Look at guys like Robert Williams. I mean, he had a phenomenal game, and it may not jump off the page at people, but I mean, he had 10 points, 7 rebounds, 5 of those were offensive, and he had 5 blocks.
The block. That's what I was gonna say. The blocks, though.
How many guys today? Like, I mean, we don't have any like stat sheets in front of us with it, but how many people have 5 blocks and 5 offensive rebounds? Like that dude's everywhere.
And it's not even like it's not even like like we were talking about, like Looney's heart and everything. Like it's not even like Robert Williams' blocks were just like tipped away to a teammate. Like this dude put it in the second and third row. Like the aggression that he was playing with, he was here. And that's exactly what I was getting at when we talk about Golden State. It's Robert Williams was out there to prove a point. And again, that goes back to that dog that we're talking about, because Robert Williams had to fight back from injury. He's dealing with the knee issues right now. And that he came to play tonight, and he looked damn good doing it.
Yeah, and now you have to sit there and you look. One team just won the championship, and the other team was the runner-up. And now you have to ask yourself, like, what's next for Boston? Like, where do you go? Do you revisit? Can we win a championship with Jason Tatum as our guy? Is Jaylen Brown the guy? Like, these are questions that have to be answered. Like, I think it could work. I think it could, but there's going to have to be kind of a coming to Jesus moment for Jason Tatum, where it's like, are you going to carry us, or is this other guy going to carry the load? Are you a one, or are you just a complimentary piece? And like I said, it's not easy for Boston in that regard, because both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have their warts. Like Tatum this year, I think he showed some growth in terms of being able to make plays for others. He made some great passes in many games in this playoff and throughout the season. He had 7 assists tonight. He's probably more of a guy that can set the table for everybody, but he's also the guy that you look to for big scoring games. Whereas Jaylen Brown isn't as versatile as far as being a playmaker, but you get it on the defensive end and you get it on the offensive end in terms of attacking and putting your head down and being aggressive. So it's like I said, if you could combine those two guys, you would have a phenomenal player. But you have a quandary now because you have a guy like Jason Tatum, first team All NBA. I'm gonna say it again, and you got a guy like Jaylen Brown, who maybe not as talented as Tatum, but he's that dude that's going to force teams' hands and not bail them out. And Tatum bailed out the Warriors in a lot of ways by just not, there was so many, he was invisible most of this game. I mean, 7 points in the first quarter, he only ended up with 13. It's do or die. He took 18 shots, but he had 5 turnovers and he only had 6 points after the first quarter. Right. So like there's so much room for him to have tried to try to affect this game in a greater way. And it seemed like he was content to just kind of fade into the background. And you can't have that if you're a guy that's first team All NBA and a guy that wants to be one of the great players in this league. Like you just can't fade like that. And I think that's what he'll learn moving forward. I think he'll be better for this. Hopefully he is. Yeah. And I think Boston, with the right pieces around those guys and maybe tweaking some things with the roster and adding a bench that can complement a solid starting 5, like that's their next step. Like it's personnel, it's internal growth for Boston. Probably more so than you can run it back with this team, but there's going to have to be some internal growth, and you've got to do something to fill the holes on the bench and in terms of maybe some point guard play, because I think Marcus Smart is a little out of position.
Yeah,
he's more of an off guard that defends and hits threes. He's more of a 3-and-D2 than a 3-and-D like 1. Like he's not a true 1, but he's serviceable for that team. But nobody's out here trying to acquire Marcus Smart to run their team, is what I'm saying. No knock on Marcus Smart, but you get what I'm saying.
I absolutely get what you're saying. And I'm going to make a really random comparison here, and it's going to come full circle to my opinion on the Boston situation. I wasn't fully in on it at the beginning of the season when so many fans were, but I feel like this team, their only saving grace is going to be if you can convince one of these guys to take a backseat to the other. And I think that's where the problem is going to come in, because at this point, I mean, they're both fairly early into their careers. I mean, at this point in their careers, who wants to officially take that role of second fiddle if they don't necessarily know that there's a guaranteed payoff for it? I respect that. I understand. These guys don't come to the league to say, hey, I want to be Robin. I get that. And like I said, I respect that. But at the same time, the reason that I personally would be in favor of splitting them is because I feel like you're never going to see either one of their true potential until that happens. And I liken that a lot to what we saw, when it came to things splitting up in Oklahoma City 10 years ago. We had Kevin Durant, we had Russell Westbrook, we had James Harden. All of those guys we saw on that roster, and we're like, they're all definitely talented players, but it happened to work out for each one of them. We did not see any of their true potential until they were away from each other. Yeah. Because all of those guys had the potential to be alpha dogs. You can't have 3 of them on one roster. So, I mean, even going to, it's a whole other time, day, and story, but even looking at Westbrook now, that's part of the struggle in LA, is that alpha dog mentality is still there. And you've got to learn at this point, you might have to settle for something else. Again, that's an entirely different conversation, but I just use that as a comparison. I think that both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have the potential to be a leader of a team. And I think that that's a big part of the reason why this project in Boston may not be as successful as the front office or the fans want it to be, because both of these guys need the same things to be successful. They need the ball in their hands. Neither one of them is really that guy that's going to sit here and coach somebody else up. And I mean, that's not a knock on either one of them. They're both still young guys. They're learning as they go. Like I said, this is their first finals experience, and they're going to grow from this. They're going to learn from this. But I think that their styles of play, what's being expected of them, and even though they won't come out and say it, we can see it in the way that they perform, what they're expecting of themselves. I think there's going to be this subtle internal clash until Boston decides to do something else about that.
Yeah, and let's just real quick before we even get to the Golden State side. I mean, we talked about this somewhat briefly. I won't completely go to the proposed trade I talked about, but I feel like if you were looking at guys, I feel like if they were going to trade one of those pieces, it would have to be Jason Tatum. There's something I feel like Jason Tatum would be the more attractive option just because of the different things he can do and the potential he has. I feel like Jaylen Brown kind of, there's a lot of Jimmy Butler to me in Jaylen Brown. Like,
I absolutely love that comparison. And because, I mean, if you think about it, Jimmy Butler was that kind of guy where we all knew that the talent was there, but nobody ever looked at Jimmy Butler and saw a leader. And again, I feel like a lot of that is not Jimmy's fault, because once he was in the right situation, Miami is in the finals. So I think that, and I 100% agree with you for a number of reasons. I think that if you're going to make a move, Jason Tatum is the one that has to be shipped out. Reason number one, like you said, I mean, across the board, if you just look at pure talent, I feel like it more naturally comes his way. And because of that, we know the one thing that he's missing is that dog mentality, that takeover spirit. I think that going and putting him in a different situation where he doesn't necessarily see somebody else to lean on is going to force him to develop that. And on the flip side of that, another reason that, not even to say I would be willing to ship him, but I'd be more willing to keep Jaylen Brown, is the fact that, and I mentioned this to you before, Jaylen might be slightly less capable right now. And again, it's early in their careers. He might be a little more deficient right now when it comes to certain areas of his game, but those can be taught. We talked about that already. Those things can be taught. But if you come in here every day and you want this, it's that much easier. And I think if you look at the two of them, Jaylen is the one that is going to sit there early mornings, late nights. He's going to be in here, as many hours as it takes a day. I think that he's going to be the one that's going to put in a little bit more to get where he wants to be. And even if that ends up with him not necessarily being that number one guy on a team, if that's your number two with that kind of mentality, the league better watch out. And that, I won't say anything, but that totally fits also, I believe, into that proposed trade that you were talking about.
So I'm gonna just go ahead and say it.
Say it.
So Tatum and whoever you need to throw into that for Dame. Who says no?
Dame Dollar. Look, the only reason I'm gonna say no, y'all know why, is because I'm a Laker fan. And outside of LA, I do have a habit. There are certain teams that I do like to watch, but it's usually because of like certain players. So I'll just go out on record. I mean, I'm a Laker fan through and through, but two players in the league right now that I absolutely love to watch are Ja Morant in Memphis and Damian Lillard in Portland. For that reason alone, Lord, I don't want to see Dame and I don't want to see Dame in green. Don't. Can we find something else? Can we possibly just like clone him? Look, it's perfect. We clone him and we call him same Lillard. It's perfect. It writes itself. But don't. It sounds amazing to me in theory. I 100% agree with you, but please don't make Dame a Celtic, please.
I don't think same dollar would sell as many T-shirts, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I don't know if same dollar is catchy. I don't know if that rolls right off the tongue.
Well, then you look, flip it and just call them counterfeit.
Oh Lord. that opens up a whole new conversation around Dame. I ain't touching that one at all. Oh, but yeah, man. Like I one more thing on the Tatum Jaylen Brown thing. I think in terms of player comp, right? We already compared Jimmy Butler and Jaylen Brown. I think that's an apt comparison. A guy I look at when I look at Jason Tatum, and a lot of people like I think miscompare when it comes to him. If I don't know if miscompare is a word, it sounds good though.
It's your birthday. Everything is a word today if you say so.
Damn straight. So one comp, like everybody says, oh well, like I saw that you might have saw this too. It was the one where they roasted it's the one where they roasted Zion, where they said he was like,
oh Lord, which one?
The Greg Oden comp when they had the face-to-face
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the one for Jason Tatum was KD, right?
I believe it was. I believe
and
it was.
I wholeheartedly disagree.
Wait. Was his KD or was his Paul George? I feel like wasn't Paul George in one of those?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
But I feel like Tatum was compared to KD, and I disagree with that comparison wholeheartedly.
100%. That's awful.
I think a more accurate one, and we're gonna keep it at Duke for this one, is Brandon Ingram. I think when I look at Jason Tatum, I think he's in a similar position to Brandon Ingram because Brandon Ingram, once he got to New Orleans, we started to see different parts of his game when he was the dude.
I like that.
But you notice, like, a lot of times it's the type of guys you put around him. Like Brandon Ingram, those guys, they made a run to the play-in and all that. Brandon Ingram was there, but that team didn't take off until they got CJ McCollum. So I think that kind of illuminates what they need in Boston, honestly. I think, like, yeah, Jaylen Brown could work, but they need another guy. They need another dynamic guard. They need, like, for example, if you put CJ McCollum on this Celtics team, like, we might be seeing Game 7 if he was on this team right now.
I agree.
But I think yeah, like
I think that, and we kind of touched on it before. I think a big part of the issue there is, like I said, both of these guys are outstanding in their own right, but I don't look at either one of them and see that alpha. I think that both of them, I think the Brandon Ingram comparison is spot on. I love that for Jason Tatum. And for that reason, I totally agree with you. I think that he would absolutely thrive when he's in a different environment and can really focus on himself. And same thing with Jaylen Brown. But I don't see the two, like, they got here and there's no knock on that. Like I said, I mean, I much respect, but I don't see this continuing the way that it's going. And I think that the number one problem is the shallow roster. But if that's number one, I think 1A is that these two guys, their paths are way too similar for the coexistence to lead to repeat finals appearances.
There's some overlap. I mean, it's kind of a similar. I mean, granted, there were some issues between Dame and CJ, right? Like they would win and they had great offensive teams, but the problem with Portland was they were terrible defensively, and that was the main thing. It's like, can you win with two small guards in your backcourt?
And if you really
And
and if you really think about it, they are very similar in style. Like you said,
and yeah, exactly.
two smaller guards, and they're both shot chasers.
Yeah.
I mean, not you can't really say that one of them is more comfortable than the other playing either on the ball or off. I feel like they're both so much alike.
Yeah, and I think that's where the problem lies in. It's like there was a lot of overlap between Dame and CJ. Like, yeah, like Dame was the kind of the long range guy. I think CJ was more of a dynamic scorer, I'd say. Like, yeah, Dame can score, but I feel like CJ was kind of like a three-level guy. And Dame doesn't really get to the cup like that. He's more of like a pull-up guy. But there was overlap in that they were both offensive guys that weren't guys that were stoppers defensively. They had to make a change. And that overlap is kind of what's happening between Tatum and Tatum and Brown, is that you have both of the guys want to be number one scorers, but the way they do it is somewhat similar. I feel like they kind of step on each other's toes because Jaylen Brown wants to, he's kind of more the mid-range guy, put his head down, get to the cup, that kind of thing. Tatum is more of a pull-up guy. He kind of drives when he has more of a lane. And you could see both of them doing that, but it's like if one person's doing it, the other person's kind of standing and watching. It's like they're not playing. It's like it's kind of your turn, my turn. And like Tatum has his moments where he's pretty good defensively. Same thing with Jaylen Brown. I just think their skill sets kind of clash in that one person is a little more well-rounded, but doesn't attack as much. The other guy attacks, but then he's not the shooter necessarily of Tatum. So it's like you have certain overlaps in their skill set that I think limits their growth. I think if you look at Brandon Ingram, he's a guy that he can be like that number one guy without necessarily having like that alpha mentality, if that makes sense. Like he kind of floats around. Like he can kind of carry it, but like you're not saying, okay, like you're the dude every night. Like he's a good guy to have in terms of he can score, but he can do some different things. Like, for example, think of like a Rudy Gay, right? Like Rudy Gay could score like nobody's business, but he wasn't like a put the team on his back and just carry everything. I don't think Brandon Ingram's that guy. I think Brandon Ingram's a guy that can masquerade as a number one option, but you got to have guys around him that kind of accentuate what he's good at. I think having a CJ McCollum, another guy that can create a shot, frees him up. And Brandon Ingram has gotten better as a playmaker to be able to create for others while also being able to score. I think that's where Tatum, I think that's maybe the next step for him, is that they're similar in that being able to score, but also being able to facilitate for others. You just have to have somebody else that doesn't kind of cramp their style or their skill set and clash there.
Look, at the end of the day, it's very similar to you guys will notice we're going to make a ton of wrestling references on this show. We might even have to branch out and have some separate pods about that as well. But when it comes to Tatum and Brown, one thing that I think needs to be mentioned, and it really goes back to what you just said, Shane, is one of my all-time favorites, The Rock, said it best: know your role and shut your mouth. And I think when it comes down to the two of them, again, the roles are so similar that it's hard to decide when you should or shouldn't be doing something. And in the past, if we have duos that work together, it's because each of them does something very well, but they also understand that the other does something that might either cover up for them or might help, take over something that they might be struggling in a little ways. You think of like an MJ and Scotty. I mean, both were terrific defenders, but Scotty's stronger. So Scotty's able to take, certain defenders that or certain offensive players that might be stronger than, MJ's used to handling, but at the same time, MJ's faster. So when the ball's in his hands, Scotty is stepping back. Now, that's a whole other situation on its own. We won't go that far, but you saw that work for them in the 90s. You saw that they understood what each of them did well. They also knew when it was time to back off and let the other one do what they do. My favorite example of this, of course, is going to be Shaq and Kobe. Both guys, and even at the time coming into the fold, Kobe was not an alpha dog. He wanted to be, and he was willing to do the work to get there. But at the same time, he knew when to go and rip a heart out. He also knew when to step back, and he was like, I'm going to let Shaq do this. They had that back and forth where even though they might have gone at it in the media, that was literally the reason for it. It's because they both knew what the other was capable of. Kobe calls out Shaq because he comes to training camp overweight. They go at these things because they know how they're going to benefit the best from each other. And that's what makes those duos the strongest, is they have to understand how to work together. And even if you look at duos in the league now, a lot of times when they don't work out, it's because of those reasons. It's because either A, they are both exactly alike, or B, they may not be 100% alike, but they're struggling to see where those differences can benefit not only the two of them, but the rest of the team. So I think that for that reason, that's why I feel like it's going to be easier to split them up and see how that works out than it would be to, I think another way that it could possibly work, but this is a super long shot and there's no way you're going to do this, with such a shallow roster that you're looking at now. Bring in somebody that's going to be the alpha dog and let them play behind them. Impossible. That's the only other way that would work, and it's not going to happen, not on the coldest day.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the point you were making about Scotty and Michael, their overlaps were the good overlaps. And what I mean by that is both of them are arguably the best defensive players ever at their position.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to have overlap, I want defensive overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Ain't nobody complaining about, oh, I get the number one assignment, you get so-and-so. Ain't nobody complaining about who they get to guard every night. Like
fighting about who's going to guard Tony.
Exactly. Like, think about it. They helped each other because their overlap was defensively. If there was somebody, because 6'8" and 225 is better than 6'6" and 215. And Scotty could go out there and guard the other team's best player. And a lot of nights, Mike could get the night off. He could probably guard the lesser of whoever it is. Right? Like, and vice versa. If there was somebody that Scotty probably couldn't handle, or it was too quick for Scotty, Michael had it. Right. I'd rather have defensive overlap than offensive overlap, because
absolutely
you ain't got to worry about who has the ball when you're playing defense. In terms of, there's no ball to share. It's, I got to stop this guy. And that's why they broke up Dame and CJ, because there was no overlap defensively. There was overlap offensively. Neither guy played defense, and defense wins titles. Like, the reason Steph and Clay work is because Steph is resourceful defensively, while Clay is probably more of a point of attack defender.
Definitely.
He could guard point guards and allow Steph to kind of hide a little bit on somebody else. Like this was like Steph putting on that extra weight actually allowed him to handle more of his own on defense, especially when they would hunt him in switches, things like that. So I would rather have defensive overlap, guys that can cover for each other, than guys that they're worried about who gets the ball and who's getting the shots. So that being said, like we're going to go from Boston now to the Golden State side.
Yeah.
And we got to talk about their, what we're looking at with this team moving forward. I mean, you got the big three. They'll be going into year 11 together, assuming that Draymond doesn't retire to do his podcast full time. But
hey, Draymond, you're welcome to jump on an episode at any time, or if you'd rather have us, that's cool. Either one works.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, we would love the exposure either way. But like when I look at Golden State, I mean, you think about like they won this year, and this was probably the most improbable run that they had because they were tested. I mean, look at the teams they had to go through. I mean, they had Denver, they had Memphis. Both of those teams have you got the two-time MVP now with Jokic.
Back to back at this point, right?
Back to back. Yeah. You got a guy that's an MVP candidate in Ja Morant.
Shout out to Ja.
They beat Luka, who's probably going to be the odds-on favorite to win MVP next year.
I agree.
And they just knocked out a first-team All-NBA and the Defensive Player of the Year. All that happened in one run. Mm-hmm. So, we talked about this before coming on. Of the 4 titles that Golden State won, I think this one is the most impressive because this was the first, you could make the argument, like we mentioned earlier, this was probably the least talented group, probably since the one that won the title, if you think about it, because the first title, the asterisk everybody wanted to put on that was, they won because everybody got hurt. And I'm like, at the end of the day, like everybody is hurt at the end of the year. You got to play the games, bro.
I got to say it. That annoys me so much. I've gotten into so many conversations with people that want to say, oh, well, so-and-so wouldn't have won this ring if this person or that person wasn't hurt. I don't care. I don't care. Don't get me started on the bubble. I could literally host an entire episode on that one by myself. Look, that drives me crazy. Oh, this wouldn't have happened if so-and-so wasn't hurt. You're absolutely right. But guess what? They were. And at the end of the day, your job is to beat who's in front of you.
Are we going to stop the games because a guy has a sprained ankle on the other team? Like, that's not going to happen.
Thank you.
The counter argument to it was a bubble title. I'm like, bro, everybody was in the bubble. It's not like the Lakers got a chance to play in Staples and then everybody else had to come to the Lakers and everybody had to do all this. Everybody was in the same place. Everybody had to go through the same protocol.
Exactly.
A title's a title. The fact that the only thing that helps anybody in the bubble argument is that there was like a 2-month break, like in the middle of the season. So like the Lakers, LeBron, like those dudes could get healthy if they were dealing with anything. They could get healthy, and that worked for a lot of teams.
Of course,
it's like look at Phoenix. Phoenix used the bubble to become Phoenix. Mm-hmm. Like Phoenix went undefeated in the bubble, and they didn't make the play-in just because their record was so bad before they got there.
Exactly.
So it's like,
that's right.
And you're talking about a team that went to the NBA Finals. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about a team that, got put out by the Mavs this year. But I ain't going to talk about that. All I'm saying is Phoenix went from being a bottom feeder in the league. The bubble was kind of their catapult to being the 64-win team that made the playoffs this year and was like number 1 seed in the conference. So when I look at Golden State this year, the big three did what they were supposed to do. Clay was hurt most of the year. They kept him out.
He didn't come back until almost mid-January.
And by the time he came back and started to get comfortable, I mean, there was a lot of things that weren't set up for Golden State. This was the first time that they weren't like the top team and everybody's looking up at them. I feel like the West was wide open. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Phoenix was the number 1 seed. They got put out. Like Utah a couple years ago was like a top seed. They got put out. So it's like these last couple of years have been kind of wide open.
If I recall, neither number one team made it this year to the finals because Miami was number one in the West. So I can't remember the exact number on it, but I think that it's been a good amount of time since the finals actually saw number one from both conferences. And that's what I love about this game. And it goes right back to that whole injury, this, that, whatever. This people tend to ignore the fact that the game of basketball is just a more active game of chess. You have to plan ahead. Things are going to happen. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you play. It doesn't matter who your opponent is on any given night. You have one job: win. That's it. That's what you're here to do. So to come out and imply that any team's title means less than another, to me, is the ultimate slap in the face. That'd be like me coming out and saying that Tim Duncan's first title doesn't count because it was a lockout year. So what? You went
Everybody
out there,
came back to play at the same time.
Exactly.
There was no advantage.
Yep.
It's good that you made that point about, people being injured and planning ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking ahead, look at Golden State's roster. They just had a first-time All-Star in Andrew Wiggins, right? We talked about how this dude was making a push to possibly, threaten Steph as the finals MVP. He was playing that well.
Yeah, he was.
And so Andrew Wiggins, in the prime of his career,
they got a guy,
a cheat code for this team.
They
don't win the title without Andrew Wiggins, right?
They got a guy that's waiting in the wings, and I hear he's quite a wise man.
Yeah, exactly. And you got a top pick in the draft in Wiseman, right? Like, he didn't even play much this year, if at all. He didn't play at all, right?
I can't remember if he made main roster, but he did spend some time in Santa Cruz with Clay.
Yeah, so like Wiseman is kind of he's the guy that they drafted to kind of be their big man of the future, right? Mm-hmm. You look at Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole's only 22, but this dude's a sniper. Like, he's that next guy that's coming in to be their fire starter off the bench. Like,
Flash
you look
cousin.
At
the splash cousin.
Exactly. Like, he took the Splash Bros and made it a pool party. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, and then you think about all the young guys. Like, think about all the dynasties we've talked about. Like, say we talked about the Bulls, right? All those dudes got older and they couldn't pay everybody. So then they blew it up. Look at the Celtics, right? Since we're talking about dynasties.
Yep.
The Celtics were on their last legs when they drafted Len Bias and made, God rest his soul, he was supposed to be the bridge between the golden era of the Celtics with Bird and the next wave, right? Yeah. When you look at Golden State and you look at this roster, the big three, all those dudes are up in age. All these, like, I think Clay might be the youngest of the three.
I believe so.
But all of them are like approaching their mid-30s. I think Clay's like 32, right? And so that roster,
and in basketball talk, yeah, man, you about to get fitted for a Kane and Walker.
Exactly. And what Golden State has done smartly is they acquired a guy like Andrew Wiggins, who's a young guy in his prime. I think Andrew Wiggins is like 27. So it's like, you take that guy and you look at Jordan Poole and James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga and Gary Payton and Moses Moody. Like, that's your whole rotation next year. Like, think about that. Like, all those dudes have shown enough potential to where you could see leaps from multiple guys going forward. So, like, their window is open, not because of the heavy lifters and the big three. It's the other guys.
Yeah.
Like, look at San Antonio. Kawhi was the bridge from their big three to them winning. Like they were still there, but Kawhi was the one that broke out and was able to help them win another title. So it's like having a contingency plan, having a plan in place. Like, you see it with other teams now. It's like look at Dallas, right? They went from Dirk Nowitzki to Luka Doncic. Mm-hmm. You go from the greatest European player of all time to the guy that's going to become the greatest European player of all time. Not many people can bridge that gap. And Luka's already been to the playoffs now, and he's proven to be one of the greatest playoff performers we've got. So like being able to go from the old guard to the new guard, maybe given an older team a little bit of a facelift, actually keeps that window open. That's what Golden State showed. And with Boston, their gap is going to be closed by getting help with the roster, getting more guys that can contribute, but also adding maybe some more experience, guys that have been there before, if you can. Because that's, like this year it was a trial by fire. Nobody on their roster had been there before. So you have to add the right amount of experience also with the right guys that can actually contribute. And I think Golden State, through the draft, through free agency, they got guys that could help. I mean, look at some of the guys that didn't play a whole lot in this series. Look at Nemanja Bjelica, right? Bjelica was on a cheap deal. I mean, it was like a 1-year deal or something. So like Bjelica is a guy who's versatile. He plays the right way, high IQ guy. Look at Andre Iguodala, high IQ guy. Doesn't play a whole lot, but he serves a purpose in that he can coach guys up, right? You can throw in some wild cards when you got high IQ guys on the bench because you got people that can keep those dudes in check. And Golden State's future, they could win with this group. They could probably win 2-3 more titles. It's not a stretch because of how they draft, how they get guys in free agency, and the guys that are already there that are going to hold up their end of the bargain and not have egos. And I think that's the reason that they've been so successful, is that nobody thinks they're bigger than anybody else. And Steph Curry carries himself like just another guy. And that's the reason that they win.
Absolutely perfect segue. I'm glad that you said that because there's something that I feel the need to point out. And I don't even feel like it's all basketball related. What I want to mention is, of course we'll get into it, at a later date. I doubt it'll make it into this pod because we're already running kind of long here. Steph freaking Curry. If you look at the kind of player that he was from, Davidson to coming into the pros and everything he's been through in his career. I mean, 2-time, regular season MVP, the only unanimous regular season MVP that we've ever had. One of the things that everybody wanted to hang over his head was the fact that he was never a finals MVP. And I think that tonight, if you paid close attention to this game and to the ceremony afterwards, it's one of those things where if you don't like or you don't love Steph Curry, it might be something wrong with you. I think that it had to be pointed out tonight just how impactful this was, honestly, from an emotional standpoint. Like if you look at the last minute of the game, once it's finally sunk in that Golden State is taking this home, Steph Curry sat down. The shot clock ran out. I think it was about 3-4 seconds left. Steph sat on the court and started crying. And I just think that seeing his emotion come out, it was amazing to see. At least I'll say that for myself. I don't know how everybody else feels, but just seeing the joy, seeing the emotion, everything just overcome him. It was awesome to see. But to me, my favorite moment of the night by far, all of this talk in the media about, oh, Steph is missing this. Steph needs that finals MVP, blah, blah, blah. That's the one thing that everybody's trying to hang over his head. So the deputy commissioner comes up ready to award the finals MVP trophy, because if if you don't know, by now that Commissioner Silver wasn't there due to COVID protocols. Deputy commissioner comes up, announces the finals MVP as, Steph Curry. So it becomes official, even though tonight pretty much solidified it. We knew there was that debate before, which I think was a very fair debate. But as soon as Davis announces that Steph Curry is the finals MVP, if you watched closely, what was the first thing that Steph Curry did? The first thing that he did, he spent almost a solid minute, high-fiving all of his teammates behind him before he even acknowledged his finals MVP trophy. And that, to me, is why this team is a team that you had better be afraid of for the next few years. That level of camaraderie, that level of brotherhood is something that you need to fear when you're on a basketball court. This man was so about the team that he did not care about his own individual award. After the media tried to tear him down for not having it, he finally won it. And that wasn't even the first thing that was on his mind. I think that the NBA needs to be on watch for these Warriors for a minute, because these guys are ready, they're hungry, and they are coming back with a vengeance.
I mean, and that's the thing. It's like Steph Curry. I mean, there's been other guys that were selfless superstars. Like Steph Curry's earned all this, man. Like people think just because Golden State was kind of the villain and just wrecking the league, Steph Curry gets the unfortunate rap. Oh, he ruined the game. And he was the main one saying, look, I'm not telling these dudes to go out here and shoot 40 footers. He put in the work to do that. Like, that's the thing. Like when you prepare the way this dude does and you practice the way he does, that stuff's not surprising. Like when you practice 40 footers and then you can shoot them in the game. You can't just show up in the gym and say, you know what, I'm just jack up 40 footers. That you gotta start 40 centimeters from the basket, right? And work your way out to 40 feet. And Steph Curry put in that work, and he's one of the most skilled players we've ever seen. But the genius of him isn't the fact that he's such a great shooter and such a great player overall. It's the fact that he is egoless in the fact that it's not about him. It's not about like his numbers. It's not about that. He puts the we before the me. And that's the reason Golden State is as good as they are, is because all those guys think like that. They got a lot of guys that have chips on their shoulder. Look at Draymond Green. He can tell you everybody that was drafted before him the year he was drafted. He can tell you that to this day because that's the chip on his shoulder. Like, look at Klay Thompson. Like, Klay Thompson is one of the greatest shooters we've ever seen, but he can also defend. He's a guy that is completely selfless and chill. Like, if he wanted shots, he could go somewhere else and be the guy that takes all the shots. He probably wouldn't be as successful. And I think he realizes that, which is why this whole synergy with them works, is because they understand, like, we win because each of us is willing to sacrifice something that benefits the whole group. And that's why Golden State continues to win. And as they get younger and you have guys that are, more talented and more bouncy and everything, and they start contributing to that, it's a system and a culture that is conducive to winning. And we've talked about that before as well. It's like culture is important, chemistry is important, and it also helps to have talent. And Golden State has all that.
Yeah, man. like I said, it's just so the game can be so competitive. It's just awesome to see these guys. Like it just really shows you those players that just have a genuine love for the game. I mean, it's hard to believe it, but you have players that get to this level, the premier league in the world, and they're simply here, just to do it. They're not here for the love. It happens. Nothing against that. It's fair, but it happens. And just seeing the celebration, and I tell you, I think a big part of what made an impact with the celebration tonight was the fact that it was in Boston. You have Golden State celebrating in the Garden, on the parquet floor. Only the second time in league history this has happened. It's only happened once before in the '85 finals when the Lakers took the Celtics. That's the only other time that a foreign team has celebrated a title on that floor. This is history in the making. It is a very big deal. My personal opinion, if I'm in the league and I'm going to win a ring and I can't win it at home, the road arenas that I would love to celebrate in just because of legendary status, of course, I would say the Parquet in Boston. I would say, I refuse to call it that crypto mess. So I would say Staples Center in LA. I would say, of course, Madison Square Garden, because if you don't, do you actually watch basketball? And I'm also going to throw in there the United Center. I feel like being able to celebrate on the same floor that Michael Jordan has. Come on, man. But these guys, and I think it was Draymond that brought it up maybe last week. He said that there's a huge difference between celebrating at home and celebrating on the road, because when you're celebrating at home, you're celebrating with 40, 50,000 people. When you're celebrating on the road, you're celebrating with about 40 or 50. And these are the people that have been in the trenches with you all year long.
Yeah, it just
So
means more.
yeah, so seeing that celebration, and then seeing how many, and more respect to the Boston fans. I think it was Mike Breen at the end of the game. He was like, "Oh, and some of the Boston faithful have started to make their way to the exit." Look, don't get me started on that, but y'all aren't Boston faithful. I don't care if you knew the game was over. I've always said that as a fan of a team, if I'm truly a fan, I'm not leaving until that buzzer sounds. That's just me. So it was awesome to see. Granted, I know it's probably, camera opportunity, this, that, whatever, but it was awesome to see how many of the Boston fans stayed behind, even though their team had just lost in the NBA finals. It was awesome to see, just for the sake of the game, that win or lose, like this is bigger than a potential 7-game series. It's all about this game, and I just love where this game is at right now.
And with Boston, man, it's like we've kind of been on their backs, these last couple pods, but they got here because they earned it. They got here because nobody they had a rough year starting out too.
No,
I
that
mean,
first half was awful.
they had a rookie head coach. The coach they had went into the front office. Like, this team could have went anywhere. They could have went up or down, and they managed to get all the way to the NBA finals, and they won the first game of the series. So,
Called that too.
yeah. And see, like, that team has they shouldn't hang their heads, even though things didn't go well. It happens. You're not going, it's their first time getting there, and I'm sure they'll be back. It's gonna take some doing, as far as Brad Stevens is gonna have to put his hard hat on and say, okay, how do we fix this roster? But they laid the groundwork for a team that's ready to contend. I mean, it's not going to get any easier in the East. Philly is going to be back. Brooklyn is going to be there. Milwaukee is going to be back at full strength, and they have, one of the five best players in the world right now. So it's like those teams are going to keep coming, and Boston stake their claim that, hey, like, we got there because they showed some heart. They won some game sevens to get to the NBA Finals. They couldn't force a last one just because there was a talent gap there. But they shouldn't hang their heads. They have a lot of reasons to be proud. They got a lot of lessons that they've learned from this, and I think they'll be back. And they got a lot of guys that I think are that they want to feel this again. They want to be back in the finals and potentially win it. And even though it ends in disappointment, they can look at a lot of things and say, hey, if we did this better, maybe this series turns out differently. And Golden State did what they had to do to win, and Boston kind of gave them some opportunities in the end, but that's because of youth and inexperience, and just inexperience. Honestly, I think if you take this same team and you put them back in the finals a year from now, they wouldn't make the same mistakes that they made, that were just pure inexperience and just being tight. There's a lot to be said for being there and having done it before.
100% agree. And again, like I said, Laker fan or not, I'm not using any opportunity to say anything bad about Boston, because just like you just said, Boston, a lot of people didn't even think Boston deserved to be here. I mean, at the start of the new year, Boston had a losing record. And during this, the latter, calendar part of the year, they had one of the best records in the league. So they truly deserved to be here. They fought their way in. And like you said, sure enough, they couldn't force a game seven. But if you think about it, tonight, Game 6 of the NBA Finals was the first elimination game that the Celtics lost in these playoffs. What I want to point out from that is no other team in these playoffs in the Eastern Conference had them at a point where they had to fight their way out. Nobody else did. Every other quote unquote elimination game they played was a game seven. They fought to the bitter end. Shout out to the Boston Celtics. You did what you were supposed to do. You just happened to run into a team that was more experienced. That is no knock on you whatsoever. You did your job. You fought as hard as you could. And you deserve praise for making it this far, especially as young as you are. So I'll tip my hat to Boston. You did what, like I said, you did what you came to do. And I think that our true basketball fans that are listening, watching, they see that. They see that this Boston roster, they put the work in. They see that Coach Udoka put the work in. Brad Stevens put the work in. Everybody was there for the ride, and it paid off. It might not have ended the way that, of course, I mean, nobody wants to lose, but getting this far when so many people had written this team off back in December, they deserve praise for this path that they put out this season.
Absolutely. And the point I want to make about that is, simply put, there's no shame in losing to the better team. They weren't the better team. They weren't the more experienced team. They weren't their best when the best was required. There's no shame in that, especially when you haven't been there before. They weren't supposed to be there. And they got there and made it tough on Golden State. It wasn't easy. Golden State just had a little bit more in the tank than they did, and had a little more weaponry. That's it. There's no shame in losing to the better team. And they go into the off season with their heads held high, and they'll retool and try to make another run, as will 29 other teams. So that it's a shame that we're talking about Golden State winning the title because that means the basketball season's over. So now we look toward draft, we look toward free agency and things like that. So,
The
that being said, I
the
mean,
draft is only a week away.
that draft's only a week away.
Less than a week at this point.
And I mean, we'll have things to talk about.
Oh yeah.
For the next few weeks as those things start to unfold. So, I'll say this because we've said it every pod now. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for listening. It's 3:11 in the morning here on the East Coast,
man,
and we put a lot of work and time into this just to keep you guys entertained and talk hoops. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. You can listen to us on Anchor. You can listen to us on Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at the JWJ Podcast. Same on Facebook at the JWJ Podcast. If you would like to follow myself, you can find me at It's a Thomas Thing on Twitter. You can find me at the same handle on IG. And you can find my man James at Titletown's Mayor on Facebook. And not Facebook. You can find him on IG and Twitter. And we'd love to have a conversation with you guys on there. So with that being said, thank you guys for your support. Thanks for listening. And thank you for listening to JWJ.
All right. Good night, y'all. We love you. Thank you so much. Please keep tuning in and we will be back. Good night, good morning, or whenever you're listening. Peace.